the growth and the momentum that cloud has picked up, I think it was unfathomable even at that time.
Will AI have an impact amongst the three in terms of how the cloud business can emerge from there?
Eventually, I think it will be all about how can they help customers leverage these models and leverage to solve their real world challenges. And for that, just having a good model is not good enough.
Another an area that is kind of eclipsed by the AI wave is the metaverse.
Some of the things holding back metaverse, I think definitely one is that we are in for a very exciting next few years where I think we're going to really reimagine every single industry.
Hello and welcome to The Interface, the Hindus podcast to make sense of the accelerating pace of change underpinned by technology. I'm your host, John Xavier, the Hindus technology editor. Imagine prompting ChatGPT with a query, let's say about the nature of cosmos. Your prompt will travel digitally to a virtual machine, which will leverage the bot's vast training data hosted in a data center, more commonly called the cloud. With that input, ChatGPT will generate a response for you. And all of this happens within seconds. Thanks to the powerful and ever improving GPUs, the cloud enables fast compute at low latency. Within just 2 decades, this industry has revolutionized the way data is stored, organized, and accessed. Data centers are now altering the way work is organized and, in many ways, even how work gets done. While cloud has helped businesses make their operations efficient, it has also left behind noxious exhaust of carbon footprints. Cloud services use massive amounts of electricity for powering servers and to cool systems and other infrastructure. Much of this energy still comes from fossil fuel sources, in turn contributing to higher greenhouse gas emissions. Joining me to discuss the evolution of data centers, the cloud business model, and the future of cloud computing is Bhavesh Goswami, founder and CEO of Cloud That. Previously, Bhavesh was part of AWS's pilot team back in 2005 when Amazon called it Simple Storage Service or S3. He then joined Microsoft's cloud division before starting his own consulting service. Bhavesh, welcome to the interface.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I'm glad to be here.
You were part of the pilot team at AWS. Today, AWS alone has an annualized revenue run rate of $100 billion. Not just AWS, other major cloud providers are also seeing a jump in revenue. Microsoft is somewhat on a similar annualized run rate, and Google is at $38 billion. Not just this, there are talks that Microsoft is increasing its server capacity in India, and Google is also expanding its base in the US. Could you give your insight on how the cloud market evolved into a multi-billion dollar industry within just 2 decades?
So you're absolutely right about the revenues numbers and stuff that, the three major players, AWS, Microsoft, and Google, I think they kind of are the top contenders. And, I think majority of the cloud spends kind of go with this big player. I think in 2005, when we launched the public beta of S3 Simple Storage Service, and then the general availability in 2006, to be honest, it just feels like it's just 18 years ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago. I think nobody could have envisioned that how big it will become. To be honest, at that time, Jeff Bezos was the CEO, and Andy Jassy, who's the CEO now, reported to Jeff Bezos, and he was a VP of AWS. My manager reported to Andy, so I was kind of Andy Jassy was my script level manager. The targets given to us that S3 is a storage service, that this storage, whatever whatever the amount of terabytes or petabytes of data, customer data you need to be on S3 in 3 years, We achieved that in 6 months. So it really sparked a revolution, I think, with the launch of S3, and we were kind of perpetually catching up to meet the demand that was generated. But one thing was very clear, that this technology is here to stay, because the developers really like the ease and the comfort it brings, right? Like, you can imagine that in the earlier days, if you had a great AI ML idea, you would have to first figure out an investor who believes in your idea, gives you $1 million check, so that you can buy the hardware to implement your AIML. If you look at the history of Google, actually, they had this search engine which was great, but the first check took them a while, because they had to go to a lot of people who had to write a big check so that they can buy the hardware and have Google available for the rest of the world. So nowadays, the developers don't have that issue. Any good ideas, any good AI, even in niche technologies like high performance computing or AI ML, you can easily experiment that, do a POC on cloud. And so it was very clear to, I think, everyone, that's going to be here for to stay. Having said that, the growth and the momentum that cloud has picked up, I think it was unfathomable even at that time. If you look at any major corporation on the planet, most of them, vast majority of them, have a substantial footprint on cloud. Yeah, earlier we used to think that financial institution and banks and stuff will never adopt cloud because of this and that and data privacy. But if you look at most of the fintech, they are on cloud. Not even in a country like US, but even in India, if you look at majority of the fintech, they are on cloud. Majority of the banks have a huge footprint on cloud. So I think that we have really sailed that ship. And I think what excites me really is that, so by the way, I finished my master's in computer science in 2001. At that time, only the top universities could afford a program in computer science, because we learned the algorithms, and to code the algorithms, we required those high performance computing, those servers that only good universities could afford. And then we would experiment, write our own code in that. In today's world, what is really, really fascinating and kind of exciting is that the entire AI is democratized. Any AI ideas, if you want to write some algorithm, if you want to do some quick application, there's that. The entire power of generative AI, which takes 1 to 2 years to train, is available on your fingerprints like this, right? With a minuscule. Like, if you want to use even the paid version of, AWS Bedrock or Microsoft OpenAI, that is like, few dollars, right? $10-15, and you can do experimentation with that. So that's, I think, that's going to really foster the innovation, is going to really foster the changes in the thing. And I think we are in for a very exciting next few years, where I think we're going to really reimagine every single industry. Not even a single industry would be left untouched by this AI revolution. So I think it's a very exciting time ahead.
Right. So yeah, the interesting part is also that given you had the AI and ML background, and getting into cloud was like a kind of, I would say,
Accidental.
what do you call, the match made in heaven sort of thing is the right word, possibly. How do you see the infrastructure kind of developing? So you mentioned that very few people had access to kind of that infrastructure. Is that is now being solved when you speak about AI being democratized? Is the hardware also becoming similarly used by across many people? The reason I ask is because still about, I think, 67% of the cloud market is held by companies like AWS, Microsoft, and Google put together.
Correct.
So how do you see the market from the infrastructure perspective, the hard side of things?
Sure. So, in one of the conversations, Jeff Bezos, when I think he was a CEO at that time, he was talking with some reporters, and he did a very interesting observation that in business, usually if you have a great idea, then people copy it immediately. Maximum you get a year, right? Like today, if you look at any kind of and Jeff Bezos gave idea of things like Kindle. So there were ebook readers were there. Amazon said, okay, if you want to get into it, they quickly launched Kindle, right? Voice assistant based off, right? So you have the Echoes and the Google Homes of the world, right? Even that quickly, if you Your rival has it, you quickly launch something like that. Smartphones, if you look at features, Samsung and Apple would launch features very rapidly to each other, right? But cloud is an area where the first launch was in 2006, publicly available launch for 2006. For the next 6 to 7 years, there was no real competition to AWS. Microsoft had a version of Azure, but really, I think it only started becoming a serious player after Satya took over in 2013-14 time period. Google is also the Google GCP, Google Compute Cloud. So sorry, Google Cloud Platform,
Cloud platform, yeah.
GCP, yeah, was launched in about 2014-15 time period. So it had a good legway. Right now, imagine that somebody had a 17, 18 years, and you can see AWS is still ahead because of that 6, 7 years it got to grow, right? You can see that in terms of revenue, it's still ahead of the competitors. Now, imagine that it has 18 years head start. So if a company is going to start today, or it started 2 years ago or 3 years ago, for them to able to catch up to these players is going to be close to impossible. Right? That it's a head-to-head collision. I think they have these guys have 18 years of experience and the power and the economies of scale. So it's become that much harder to compete. But we see a lot of smaller and more specialized cloud coming, and that could be really good. If you take an example of that, the Kritrim cloud that Bhavesh Agrawal that we talked about,
Oh,
he
right.
launched, right? I think that would be really great for Indian languages. So if you today, I was traveling in Nagaland a few years ago, and I was just as a traveler, I was surprised to know that even a small state like Nagaland has some 7 to 8 major languages. So to communicate with each other, they created like a simplified Naga language, and then that is being used for official purpose. But actually, if you look at the people, they speak 7 to 8 different languages. If you look at any major state, Rajasthan has, Marwadi, Mewadi, and Rajasthani, and things like that. So not even a state has the same language. You have so many different languages, dialects. If they can, so for example, if a cloud player wants to come and wants to produce AI/ML tools, and you want to produce something really interesting, or let's say a large language model, but based on those niche Indian languages, then certainly they can be very successful, because these larger corporations wouldn't be able to fill all these niches that exist in a large country like India. But if today, if even if somebody was backing me up with $1 billion, and I wanted to compete with AWS or Amazon head on and say, I will do exactly what they're doing, but better. I personally feel that ship has sailed, because even companies, if you look at VMware or IBM, who try to compete with these players, then were not very successful. So they shut down their cloud division, and then they started offering services on this cloud. So if you look at
Right.
VMware currently, you have VMware on AWS, VMware on Azure, instead of
Yeah.
pure VMware cloud. So they
Yeah.
adapted as well, because they also realized that the head-on collision is virtually impossible. So that's one
Yeah.
thing. In terms of hardware, John, if somebody wants to buy hardware and create their own system, I think nowadays it is available, and you can buy and you can do it. But I feel that most companies, given how expensive the hardware is, and the cost of buying and installing and maintenance and all that headache, I would say 99 companies out of 100 would prefer to use one of the cloud providers and use the hardware on that cloud, compared to installing and buying their own hardware. So I
Right.
think most companies are looking to not have that headache of buying their own hardware.
Right. Great. That's an interesting point about you raised about Kutrim. Um, so it's kind of, from what you say, is a very impenetrable space that they've created, and they have the legacy of starting much early on. And right now, amongst the three, the other interesting aspect is both Microsoft now being using OpenAI, and Google using its own Gemini with AI compute. That's a totally different business model they are creating on putting computing on their own cloud, while AWS is still keeping things open for the open source large language models to come and play. Is that because Synergy Research had a report stating that AWS kind of mildly lost its share in the first quarter of this year, given that language models are going in the Azure and Google Cloud. So will AI have an impact amongst the three in terms of how the cloud business can emerge from there?
So the short answer is yes. You're absolutely right. I think that's why Satya Nadella is such a respected CEO, right, and such a revered leader, because he's just so great. And I think while if you look at all three of them, right, like Google had a bit of a head start with their large language models and stuff, but I think Satya Nadella did a masterstroke by investing in OpenAI early and leveraging that company's research and capabilities to kind of enhance Microsoft's capabilities, right? So I think that was a masterstroke, because that really helped Microsoft. But having said that, I would feel that what we see in the market is that there are a lot of language models which are available across the platforms, and large language models more or less has will be a commodity and be commoditized, that it won't be a special. So if you take something um, the latest ChatGPT models, and the Google's LLMs, and there's so many different. There's Anthropic as a company. They have so many models. There's some open source models, like you mentioned, large language models. The um, the the difference in performance, the difference in kind of efficiencies between them, eventually, maybe in the next 6, 7, 8, 9 months, will kind of tend to be kind of erode, and they both will come around the same levels, because they will learn from each other, right? And all of them are very well funded. Google is well funded, so is Microsoft, so is Amazon, and Amazon has invested in Anthropic, as we all know. So they also are trying to kind of have something where they have a bit of control. Uh, so there will be parity. So I think eventually, I think it will be all about how can they help customers leverage these models, and leverage to solve their real world challenges. And for that, just having a good model is not good enough. You require the entire ecosystem around that to be able to solve a problem. So, to take an example, today, if I have a conversation and I can give the conversation to the LLM and said, is this, let's say, it's between a customer and a teleservice operator. Was the customer, happy, unhappy, very angry, sad? What was the tone, right? It can very easily give me that tone. But integrating it with an LLM, that my voice is coming, then I need to capture the voice, and I need to be able to send the voice in real time, and real time get the analytics, and all of that requires a lot of engineering. So yes, the LLM, if one LLM is like 10% better than the other, but the other cloud has all the supporting structure where we can very easily implement something like this, right? Then more and more developers will choose that cloud compared to the cloud with slightly better LLM. So I think that if you look at the cloud providers right now, they are all trying to create that supporting structure around LLMs and this. So AWS has Bedrock, Microsoft has OpenAI integrations with their Azure cloud. So I think that's kind of they're all working in that direction, I think, and they're all pretty equivalent, I think, at that time, and they're all going to try to really grab the market share. But really, what really happened, where the hampering, I think, is there, is there's going to create a further divide between the three players and the smaller cloud players. Because anyways, it was tough to be a smaller cloud player. But now, if you are a kind of a mid-tier cloud provider, then it's going to be that much harder for you to compete with these larger clouds, because they have this LLMs and they can keep investing in it, and they can put $10 million and not worry about it for the next 5 years, right? Which is not
Right.
possible for a lot of smaller cloud providers. So I think between the three cloud providers, it's really good to see the healthy competition and them investing and making the LLMs better and better. But I think eventually the all of them will grow off this, and I think the one which will win, quote unquote, win or get the best market share is the one which understands the requirement of the customer and their partners, and adopt those strategies.
In fact, the point that you mentioned about Satya Nadella, thinking ahead about the whole thing is is something that is also a strong point that I had, is like putting in $10 billion to get 100 billion, 10 times return,
Yes,
is
absolutely.
a possible way to look at it. And also to kind of open up the whole cloud ecosystem and the business. So if we see large language models as one area that is powering the cloud ecosystem, we also have something around the autonomous vehicles and a few other areas where there is a lot of scalable opportunities. For instance, IoT and various other areas where the use of cloud is coming in. How do these use cases, how will these develop? For instance, an area that is kind of eclipsed by the AI wave is the metaverse. So, which is an area where there's a significant area of use for cloud providers. So, how will these specific advances in emerging technology have an impact on the cloud?
Yep. So you're right about the IoTs and the metaverses of the world, that they now have become a little bit of on the back burner. I feel, John, I feel that so the LLMs have been around for a long time, right? Like I think most of the people have only learned about them now. But if you even take OpenAI, I feel I don't remember top of my head, but I at least remember reading about their first LLM. I think about 3 to 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So they have been their version one of their GPT model. So that's why it's called GPT-4, right? Because there are four versions before that, and each version takes 2 to 3 years to train. So I think about 5 to 6 years ago that the version one was released. It was still very smart. It was able to kind of chat a little bit and answer a little bit of queries and things like that. But it wasn't substantial enough kind of wow factor to impress everyone, right? Then the version two came. I believe it was version two that you can start it coding, that you can give a command, it will churn out code for you, right? So that was a lot of developers started taking interest because hey, now I can. But it was more of a novelty. Hey, look, I can type English and it can code for me, right? It wasn't really something that they can use into their day-to-day life. Then the version kind of three and stuff, and then suddenly they introduce a chat GPT version where you can interact with it, right? So you don't have to download the model and install in this and that. It actually became more accessible, and boom, it kind of created this massive wave. So I believe in metaverse could be something similar. I mean, I feel maybe Facebook and again, Mark Zuckerberg, a revolutionary leader. I think he was just maybe slightly ahead of the his time, in terms of metaverse. That the technology isn't there yet, but I think maybe in the next 4 to 5 years, right? Like the technology. So some of the things holding back metaverse, I think definitely one is the quality of the headsets. That either the headsets are super expensive. So like Apple has one, which is really great, but it's super expensive. Microsoft had something called as HoloLens, which they tried to. I had a I got a chance to use it when I was at Microsoft campus. I think 5 years, 6 years ago, and we played a game with it where the like a trial game where the demons were coming out of office buildings, and we were in the Microsoft office, so office rooms and stuff like that. I thought it was really impressive. But then they also kind of paused that a little bit. It hasn't made. And the other ones which are available in the market aren't good enough for you to feel this is real. So John, I really feel that it just incremental changes, and once boom, we'll reach that capacity of a good quality headset at a good price, and it could really re-trigger the entire wave of this augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse, and things like that. Maybe the next
Right.
um, Xbox or this would come with that, and then that kind of suddenly becomes very, very common, and
So I
every
think
household has
what you're
one.
saying is more the hardware has to match the software to really get that momentum going, like how we have with the LLMs. So
Yeah.
the on the related topic of the metaverse and the what do you call the advances within, if you look at from the cloud ecosystem, what sort of breakthroughs that led to this kind of so much of data being processed on data centers, taking things from on-premise to putting things on the cloud. From there, how will some of those breakthrough technologies emerge? So, if you were to look at the cooling system, or how the cloud itself is kind of put to a better use, or how are these data centers being made better for higher performance?
So I think that there's tons of research, John, that goes around the world to make it faster, better, cheaper, more energy efficient. In fact, all major cloud providers have taken a self goal in terms of their being carbon neutrality. I believe Microsoft has a 2030 as a goal where they, as a company, they want to become a carbon neutral. Not only that, so we are a Microsoft partner, we're Amazon partner, we're Google partner. We provide consulting and training services on those clouds, right? Even as a partner, we are then mandated that, okay, you need to be carbon neutral by 2030 as part of it, right? So we have started taking the step, measuring our carbon footprint as an organization and figuring out how we'll be able to reduce it to zero in the next few years, right? So I think it has
Right.
started. Also, if you look at some of the innovations in data center, just last, I think about 2 years ago or something, Microsoft started experimenting with underwater data centers. So you can imagine like a container, but a round shape, completely sealed, right? And they put it at the bottom of the ocean in somewhere in the coast of England or Ireland or something, where the water is naturally cold. So the cost of the cooling is completely zero because it's going to be really cold, and the surrounding water is just going to
Yeah.
cool the container. And then the electricity that is used to run the servers comes from a wind farm nearby and things like that. So they had it underwater for 2 years, then they pull it out after 2 years, look at the condition of the data center and the servers and this and that, and they actually published an article where they concluded that this is indeed physical, both environmentally, monetarily, and just generally that it is feasible to have our entire data center infrastructure underwater. So some innovations like that, I think, is also
Right. So on
going to be
the
super useful.
on the topic of the carbon footprint itself, if you were to, how do data centers measure their carbon footprint, Bhavesh? Is there a measure on, some kind of a yardstick?
Yeah, so there is a, by the way, this is a specialist role. I'm not a specialist on measuring carbon footprint, but
Yes.
just to give generalize this, there are calculators available. So you put in your, how many servers you have, what kind of wattage the servers have, what kind of cooling capacity you have, and what is the outside temperature, inside temperature. Kind of, it just basically a mathematical formula where you put all those formulas and outcomes your consumption, that what is your carbon consumption, and then you figure out how much of that consumption is coming from renewable sources versus coming from non-renewable sources. So whatever is coming from non-renewable then becomes a carbon footprint, right? So again, I'm not an expert on that, but it's a mathematical formula where you put in all the numbers and out comes your footprint. We had to do the same thing for our company, Cloud That, because going forward with Microsoft, and by the way, Amazon also has some goal. I don't remember top of my head, but I think by 2030 or something, they also have taken a goal to kind of something about carbon neutrality. And so, we also, I mean,
Right.
we just measured it so that we can also go down that
Yeah.
path.
That's very interesting. Also, is it possible with the current pace of our global economies moving into renewables, how easy or hard it is to get into that, 2030 you will power the data centers with renewable energy? Do you have a sense on that? I mean, not as an expert, but somebody who's observing the industry.
Yeah, so that's a challenge they've taken, right? So I think, and it's been publicly displayed and things like that. So I think that there's a lot of seriousness behind meeting that commitment. If you are a big Apple fan, and if you look at their annual conferences where they release the latest iPhones, last year's uh, World, I think it's called World Developer Conference by Apple or something like that, it was all about sustainability, right? They were not the amount of time given to talking about new features was equivalent to the amount of time given to sustainability, because they were talking about how the Apple Watch is completely sustainably built now, and things like that, right? So I think a lot of these large companies realize that the youth is serious about climate and climate change, and they want to make sure that the companies they associate with are taking this climate crisis seriously. And yeah, all these companies have some goals to be carbon neutral, or by 2030 or 2035, or whichever year that they have chosen, and they are going the other path. I know that Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they are spending quite a bit in renewable energy sources. They are doing a lot of this experimentation, like underwater sea, underwater data center, like we discussed, right? And I'm pretty sure that if not completely carbon neutral, they'll be pretty close to it by 2030.
Sure. So the one other, or rather, my last question is around the hardware itself. So we're speaking about systems that have been built, or been building since the last 18 years or so. So there's
Sure.
also a hardware move that's happening. How are these e-wastes handled in this particular industry? How does that work?
So again, for a lot of these companies, I think the average life of a server is from 3 to 5 years. So every 3 to 5 years, the hardware is refreshed. In a lot of countries like India, and certain countries like that, the hardware is just directly reused, because the server is not dead. It's not non-usable. It's just not up to the mark that it is affordable for those companies. But then it goes to the secondary market, and I think it's just resold in a lot of the secondary markets as well, and then that is reused. And I think after that, it is India is a very big country for recycling. It goes to this very customized recycling places where they take away the metal and the plastics and things like that, and then they recycle it, right? So I think in India we have a very robust recycling industry. I'm part of a program called Stanford Seed, and so it's by the Stanford University, and it's kind of tailored for entrepreneurs. And some of the companies in this program, they kind of focus on this recycling and stuff. So they were just mentioning a lot of European and a lot of Western countries who don't have the recycling infrastructure tend to send a lot of that servers to India, and to in countries like India and China for recycling as well, where we are growing population, we need more metal, more plastic, things like that. So we take it, we recycle it, and then that metal and plastic is used domestically for producing new stuff. So
So this
yeah, like it.
can it be a challenge of, let's say, some level of dumping that happens in a growing country like India? I mean, that is one. And the second is, if they're being sent after, let's say, being retired after 3 or 5 years, can they be used in the same way in a different location? And would it have the same level of cooling systems to ensure that the data, I mean the way it is being used doesn't make the impact on the environment worse?
And an easier way to understand this would be like a laptop. So, as a company, our policy is that after 3 years, we recycle the laptop. So, if the employee's been with the company for 3 years, every 3 years, we give them a new laptop, right? Because what starts happening is that it's not, even if the laptop is working well, it's not that all of a sudden after 3 years, the laptop has an issue or this or that. It's still running. It's the same it was, 2 years, 11 months, and 30 days ago. But the probability of the failure is really high. So, and because the kind of data that our employees would have on the laptop, it would kind of would create a lot of issues if it crashes, and then the loss of productivity of the employee, loss of productivity of the tech support guys to fix those issues, right? It's kind of a lot of loss of that. So keeping that in mind, every 3 years we recycle the laptop, but it's a perfect, most of them are in perfect working condition. Can that be used by a college which is having a lab setup, and they just want students to have a lab setup? So there, if the laptop fails, it fails. They can just buy a new one and do. There's no burden of like a tech support or data loss or things like that. So in that environment, they can still keep using that laptop for another 3 to 4 years and be okay with it, right? So it's the same way you can imagine those servers, that the servers, it's not that after 3 years they start becoming bad or something, but the probability of failure becomes so high that it's just not economically feasible for these large corporations to keep it running. And so it goes to smaller players, smaller data centers or smaller people. Like, for example, a company might just want 5, 10 servers in this data center to manage something, right? So it kind of goes to the secondary
Right.
markets where they're taken care of. So it doesn't really significantly harm the environment. I think the more we recycle or reuse, rather, the better, because we are using it for longer instead of dumping it. But yeah, I mean, sometimes they are not as energy efficient as the newer ones will be, and
Right.
the energy to performance ratio keeps getting better and better and better. So that of course will be better in a new one. But then again, to create a new one, you have to create fresh resources. You have to have fresh plastic, fresh metal, fresh all the
Right.
things. So that's a drain on the environment as well. So to be honest, like it's a catch 20. We have to kind of balance both the sides of this equation.
Yeah. In fact, the in fact that this that's led me to this interesting ideas. Like, for instance, in a country like India, you've seen what's happening in Delhi with so much of heat, climate change, and all that. And
Yes.
a lot of different parts of India is going through a similar kind of a climate change, I would say.
Yes.
Are data centers a place? Do they hold a place in a place like India, or should we be looking at places like you mentioned, where Microsoft is experimenting in Finland or in the Arctic Ocean or somewhere in the Antarctic area? Is India the right place for data centers given the impact of climate change?
So, see, John, the short answer to that would be that yes, we need to have data centers. The reason for that is that unfortunately, the way it works is the data center is governed by the laws where it is physically situated. So, if, for example, let's say we have a bank like RBI, which is owned by, there's a stake of the Indian government in that bank, and stuff like that. Now, if an RBI, for example, puts the data in a data center in cloud, which is in, let's say, a European country or a US or any other, Singapore or something, then it is governed by the laws of those countries. And most banks would probably not want that. They would want that they're governed by the laws of the countries where the banks are physically situated. So that itself mandates that we need data centers in India, because otherwise, we can't provide that kind of guarantee that you will be only judged by the laws of a single country. Um, so absolutely, I think we will require data centers in India for that. But what happens is, for example, if you want to train the LLM, right, you are using gigantic amount of energy, because you are using thousands and thousands of servers non-stop for 2 to 3 years to create the, or 1 to 2 years to create the LLM, right? Once the LLM is created, then it can be used anywhere. So I think for things like LLM creation, some complicated algorithm creation, right? Some, let's say, for example, if a movie studio wants to render the movie, which again takes a lot of CPU, those kind of things can be done where it is more cost effective, easier to cool, like in European countries or US and things like that. But yes, so I probably would say it
Yeah.
probably is not the best to train LLMs in India data centers, but then we need data centers so that we can give surety to our customers that they'll be governed by the laws of India.
Right. So thank you for that. I think thank you so much, Bhavesh, for taking us through the whole process of data centers and your experience through building the cloud ecosystem at AWS, and the various ways in which data centers are managed. Thanks for sharing your insights on the interface.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Interface Podcast. For more such episodes on technology and innovation, tune in to the Interface on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Do share your comments with us at the interface at thehindu.co.in. To keep yourself updated with the latest tech, please go to thehindu.com or follow us on all social media platforms. Thank you.